Law schools just got their new employment numbers. Every single one of them is about to tell applicants the same thing. They've got record employment, best year in a decade, it's time to apply. But here is what is actually in the new American Bar Association report. Berkeley, one of the top law schools in the country, placed 36 of its graduates as clerks for federal judges last year. This year, only 18. That's half the job placement gone in 12 months. NYU's nonprofit legal placements dropped by 41 graduates in a single year. In Washington, D.C., which is the single most important city for legal jobs in America, 244 positions disappeared. And somehow, law schools are still claiming that employment went up. I spent the past couple of days going through the entire American Bar Association employment numbers report. And what's in it is not what law schools want applicants to read. So if you're thinking about a law school or you know someone who is applying to law school, this is the most important talk I've given in quite a while. Now, there's a math trick I want to share with you because you got to see it before anything else makes sense. Law schools calculate employment as a ratio, graduates with jobs divided by the total number of graduates. The class of 2025 rate came in at 87.7%, up from 87.2% last year, which sounds great on the face of it. But here's what actually happened underneath. The number of real legal jobs fell by about 2,200 in a single year. That's down about 6.5%. The graduating class fell faster. About 2,700 fewer graduates came out of law school last year. And so when the number of graduates drops faster than the number of jobs, the ratio goes up. It's just math. It's got nothing to do with the job market getting better. Here is an easier way to think about it. Picture a restaurant with 100 seats and 100 customers. It's 100% full, it's at capacity. Then the owner tears out 40 seats. The next day, 70 customers show up. They're still at capacity and even have overflow demand. But business didn't actually get better, the restaurant just got smaller. That is what happened with law schools this year. And so when a school tells you their class of 2025 was a record year, the honest version is the job market shrank, their class shrank faster. That's why the percentage looks nicer. And so while every word of that would technically be true, it doesn't mean what you think it means. Okay, so where did jobs actually disappear? The drop wasn't spread evenly. Big corporate law firms, the ones you see in TV shows, they took a small hit, about 7% fewer jobs at the biggest firms. Not great, but also not a crisis. There are three other areas, however, that got totally hammered. Government legal jobs dropped by 604 positions in a year. Lawyers working for the US government or state or local government, down 13%. Nonprofit legal jobs, meaning legal aid for people who can't afford lawyers, civil rights work, immigration help, lost 483 jobs, down 14%. Corporate in-house work, meaning lawyers inside a company instead of at a firm, lost 308 jobs, down 13%. Those three categories together account for about 2/3 of every legal job that disappeared this year, and they've all got one thing in common. They are all tied to what the federal government is doing. Government hiring for obvious reasons, nonprofits because most nonprofit legal work runs on federal grant money, and corporate in-house work because companies slow down on hiring lawyers when they can't predict what new regulations are coming. So what you're really looking at is federal policy showing up in the job data 6 months later. All right, the cleanest piece of evidence in the whole report is DC. In 1 year, the total number of law graduates placed in Washington, D.C. dropped from 1,657 to 1,413. That's 244 jobs gone, about 15% of the DC legal job market for new graduates gone in 12 months. And that is the biggest drop for any major city in the country, bigger than New York, bigger than California, bigger in Texas. And DC matters more than any other market for one reason. That is where the most federal legal hiring physically happens. The DOJ is there, the SEC is there, the IRS legal division's there. All the big federal agencies with lawyers work out of DC. And when the federal government pulls back on hiring, DC is the city that feels it first. So the law schools that got hit the hardest are the ones that built their reputation on sending graduates to Washington. Now, George Washington University is the most DC-focused law school in America. About 45% of their entire graduating class used to end up in DC. This year, down to 41%. And 4 points might not sound like a lot, but for a school whose whole pitch is, we're going to get you to DC, it's a real warning sign. Now, American University placed 146 graduates in DC last year. This year, only 134. So their DC share dropped from 38% to 33%. And American's career office actually did some pretty impressive work trying to help the students who lost offers due to the federal hiring freeze. They ran emergency alumni calls. Their dean even went on CNBC to talk about it, but they still couldn't catch the drop. Now, George Mason dropped from 70 DC placements to 51 DC placements, almost 30% of their DC pipeline gone in 1 year. Howard University lost 6 DC placements, but Howard's bigger problem is worse. Their total employment rate collapsed 15 points in a single year, from 85% down to 70%, and the share of Howard grads still looking for work 10 months after graduation jumped from 6% to 21%. 1 in 5 Howard grads was still out of work this year, one of the worst collapses in the entire ABA report. Then there are the schools where DC just fell off the map entirely. Texas had 24 DC placements last year. This year, they had so few that DC didn't even make their top 3 employment states. Same story at Wisconsin, Syracuse, Fordham, Richmond, Florida, BU, Penn State, Southern University. All of them had double-digit DC placements last year. All of them lost DC as a top destination this year. And so if you were planning to go to one of those schools specifically because it had a federal pipeline, that pipeline narrowed a lot in the past year. Now, you might be wondering what caused all of this, and here's the backstory in case you're not aware. In January 2025, a new executive order froze federal hiring. Within a week, the Department of Justice started calling law students and started taking back job offers that had already been accepted. And these were jobs that were signed, accepted, apartment already rented kind of jobs. One student at Vermont Law had his DOJ offer pulled after he'd already signed a lease near his new office. A 2L at Seton Hall lost an IRS job he turned down private law firms to take. William and Mary's Dean counted 6 offers pulled in the span of a single week. Georgia State had 4 IRS offers pulled in a week. Harvard's career office sent out an emergency email warning students their offers would be canceled. The DOJ Honors Program, which is the main way the DOJ hires new law graduates every year, basically stopped entirely for the class of 2025. That program normally places over 100 graduates. This year, almost none. Now, hiring freezes have happened before. Obama froze federal hiring back in 2011, but the difference this time is that previous freezes didn't take back offers that had already been accepted. This one did, and that's new. So the 604 lost government jobs in this year's report are the receipt for it. Now, here's the part almost nobody's talking about, and once you see this, the whole picture changes. Not every law school lost DC jobs, some actually gained. Harvard, for example, gained 14 DC placements, went from 107 up to 121, and so their share of graduates going to DC actually grew this year. Georgetown added 6, even though they were already the second biggest DC feeder in the country. Virginia added 4. Yale, Stanford, and the other top schools held steady or inched up. And so think about what that means. The hiring freeze didn't kill federal legal hiring, it just concentrated it at elite schools. And so the agencies that kept hiring through exceptions and carve-outs mostly kept hiring from the same small group of top law schools they've always hired from. The schools one level down, especially the ones whose whole pitch was, we're a cheaper way to get to DC, those lost ground. And so picture a big company that normally hires 100 new employees a year from 20 different colleges. Now they've got to cut back to 70. But they don't cut evenly. They cut the backup law schools first and keep their main pipeline at the top 5 schools mostly intact. That's really what happened with federal legal hiring this year. And this is the most important pattern in the entire ABA report, and nobody else is really talking about this, not sure why. But I'll say this. I mean, if you're looking at a school like American or George Mason or Catholic or any of the mid-tier schools that market themselves as a cheaper path to federal work, you've got to be realistic about the degree that you're buying. It's not the same product it was 3 years ago. The numbers have specifically softened at exactly the schools that sell federal access the hardest. Now, that doesn't mean don't attend. It means don't pay full tuition. You want to negotiate hard for that scholarship money because the price made sense when the outcomes were reliable, but the outcomes have gotten less reliable, and so the price should follow. Okay, now the strangest part of all this is the federal clerkships. A quick explainer if you're new to this. A federal clerkship is a job working directly for a federal judge for a year or two after you graduate. It's one of the most prestigious jobs a new lawyer can get, and almost all of them go to graduates from top schools. Now, federal clerkships were supposed to be totally separate from the hiring freeze. Federal judges hire their own clerks, and the executive order didn't touch the judicial branch. Harvard's student newspaper even ran a piece in early 2025 saying federal clerkships were, quote, unaffected by the freeze. But then the numbers came in. Start with Berkeley, for example. They had 36 federal clerkships last year. This year, 18, half the jobs gone. Virginia, Columbia, Harvard, Yale, and Chicago all lost positions. So did Cornell, Duke, Boston as well. A handful of schools actually held steady or went up a little bit. Stanford picked up 2, Georgetown added 2. But the pattern is pretty clear. Almost every top school with a real federal clerkship pipeline saw those jobs drop in the exact same year the hiring freeze hit, even though federal clerkships legally have nothing to do with the freeze. And nobody can fully explain why. Judicial hiring, it's not like it's transparent. There are some theories floating around, like more federal judges delaying retirement, fewer older judges cutting back, more judges wanting clerks with a couple years of firm experience instead of brand new grads. Some of this has been building for years. The freeze may have just sped it up. But either way, the takeaway is this. Even the backup plan for top-tier law grads narrowed this year. Berkeley losing half its clerkship placements tells you something's going on. Now let's talk about NYU before we talk about what to do with all of this. NYU's nonprofit legal placements went from 115 to 74 in a single year. They lost 41 of those jobs, biggest nonprofit law drop at any school in the country. Berkeley lost 25, Columbia lost 24, Stanford and Boston College both lost 14 each. And so these top law schools' nonprofit pipelines got hit harder than any other tier, and it's not random. A big share of nonprofit legal work runs on federal grant money. When the federal government freezes hiring and delays contracts, the nonprofits downstream of that funding have to cut their positions. At the same time, the graduates whose DOJ offers got canceled flooded into the nonprofit job pool, competing for the same shrinking pile of jobs. And that's a second order effect, doesn't tend to make the news. It shows up in the data 8 months later. NYU losing 41 nonprofit jobs isn't really a story about NYU. It's a story about how fast a policy change can ripple through job markets that don't look connected until they break. Okay, so if you're thinking about law school, what do you actually do with all of this, right? Understand that a law degree isn't one job market. It's a dozen different job markets connected to each other. Government, nonprofit, federal judges, state judges, big firms, small firms, solo practice, in-house at companies, academia. Each one has its own hiring cycle and its own risks. One executive order reshaped 3 of those markets in 6 months. That's how fast this can move under you. So if you're picking a law school in 2026, based on what the job market looked like in 2023, that means you're planning with outdated information. Law school is a 3-year commitment and a 10 to 20-year debt load. A lot can change in 3 years. Now, the schools that protect you when policy shifts are the ones with multiple paths out. If every type of employer your school feeds into is connected, meaning when one dries up, the others dry up too, you're exposed. Schools with broad networks across multiple cities and industries have backups, but regional schools with tight federal pipelines don't in the same way. So here is an easy check you can do in under 5 minutes. Pull up any law school's employment report, look at the top 3 cities their graduates end up in, and the top 3 types of employers. If any one city is more than 40% of the class and any one type of employer is more than 30% of the class, that school is concentrated, and that means they're exposed. Now, when you read any law school's numbers, don't focus on the percentages, focus on the raw count, the absolute numbers. Look at how many actual full-time legal jobs they placed last year, compare it to the year before, compare it to 5 years ago. Is it up? Is it down, or is it flat? A school placing 200 real legal jobs is doing something totally different from a school placing 80, even if the percentages look similar. Then ask admissions the questions they don't want to answer. How many of your class of 2025 had offers pulled? What did your career office do for them? What's your federal clerkship trend over the last 3 years? What percentage of your current class is still looking for work 10 months after graduation? If they give you real answers, you've learned something valuable. If they hedge or they don't want to answer, or if they're vague, you've learned even more. Now, I want to be upfront about something here. Of course, I teach the LSAT for a living. I run an LSAT coaching business. So you should know that's my job. Before I make this last point, I'd rather tell you my bias than pretend I don't have one. But here's the argument anyway. Your LSAT score doesn't really predict whether you're going to be a good lawyer, and that's not what it's trying to do. What your LSAT score actually controls is which law schools admit you, what scholarship money they offer, which city you end up in for 3 years, whose alumni network you join, and how much debt you take on. And every one of those things matters more in a market like this one than it did 3 years ago. Think about that graduate whose DOJ offer got pulled in February of their last year of law school. If they're at Yale, the career office makes calls for them. The alumni network's going to take care of them. They're going to land somewhere reasonable. But if you're at a regional school that charged full tuition and sold you on federal access, you're in real trouble. The difference is the school. It's not your intelligence or your work ethic. It's literally the reputation and the network of the school that you go to. Your LSAT score is the single biggest lever on which side of that line you end up on. Nothing else in the application is close. If you can jump your LSAT score from a 160 up to a 170, you're in a totally different tier. You're getting more scholarship money, taking on less debt. You end up in a different city, have a different career. Your life ends up in a different place because of 10 points on one test. And you don't have to like the LSAT. You don't have to think it's fair, but you've got to know that it is the tool available to you, whether you like it or not. So take it seriously. You get options. If you don't, you won't. Now, the class of 2025 is the first class whose data fully shows what federal policy can do to the law school pipeline. Probably not going to be the last. The class of 2026 is already scrambling. The class of 2027 is doing on-campus interviews right now, assuming the federal job market's back to normal, but I wouldn't bank on that assumption. If you're in the middle of the application cycle and the offices are telling you everything's fine because the rate went up, remember two things. The employment rate went up because the graduating class got smaller, and 244 DC legal jobs disappeared from the national totals in a single year. So take it seriously, that's all I'm saying. Take the LSAT seriously, look at the actual numbers, and don't trust the marketing brochures in a market like this one.